Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, I don't know. Who cares? It's Monday, September 18th, 2017. I have too many screens to look at here. I got to figure out some way of narrowing down the number of things I need to look at just to see if things are working. But I get thumbs up so far from Justice, and all indications are that everything is working just fine. Levels are 5 Spicers by 5 Lewandowskis. Thanks very much, Justice. Lots to talk about this morning, some of which is extraordinarily important, some of which is petty nonsense and garbage with which we will occupy ourselves nonetheless. Big news of the week, I guess, the Affordable Care Act repeal is on the table again. You've all gotten the message. Our liberal media, our actual liberal media, and our actual liberal blogosphere, and all the people that we love and know and trust, and some of whom we are upset with this morning. Anyway, have done a pretty good job in informing us. Cassidy Graham is back in circulation. None of it makes any sense. I don't think we should try to waste too much. We will try not to waste too much time figuring out, well, what sense does it make for Republicans to have rejected a brutal repeal of the Affordable Care Act only to come back with an even more brutal proposed repeal later on and try to get more votes for it. But we know, look, the world turns upside down 3 times a day at this point. It's out there. They don't have very much time to do it. No one is entirely sure of what the procedure can and can't be, will and won't be. The only thing we can be sure of is that once again, it is up to all of us to call in, make our voices heard, make our displeasure known. This repeal, I think, would turn out to be even more egregious. Why I don't know. I feel like at the same time that our mainstream traditional media and our blogosphere have told us very clearly that, to be on the lookout for this thing. They have not dropped the ball on this. But at the same time, I also feel like we spent so long during the last round of repeal hearing about, not believing, but hearing so much about how Cassidy and Graham and the others were going to, if this thing went down, or even if it didn't, that they had waiting in the background a more moderate approach that would do something less terrible somehow. And it turns out that once they committed it to paper, it was, in fact, even more disastrous than the original proposals were. And, of course, we heard so much around the fantastic turnaround of John McCain at the last minute defeating this thing. Not this Cassidy Graham, but the original plan to move the McConnell plan through to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and how he was going to stand on principle and refuse to vote for any bill, perhaps, maybe, I don't know, that didn't follow regular order. Cassidy Graham in no way follows regular order, but still he's flirting with the thing. I don't know what to tell you. That's the important stuff. Greg is here already. He'll tell you all about
the non-important stuff.
Oh, no. Oh, really? Do you want to talk about the Emmys? That's the other topic of the morning. I don't want to talk about the Emmys.
I do want to talk a little bit about gossip and Washington steakhouses. But let's finish with healthcare here. Okay,
why not? Let's be done with it forever. Go
ahead. If you step back and look at the bigger picture, to me, at least, this is my opinion and my opinion only, the part about dinosaurs being fatter in the middle and skinny at both ends, it seems to me that Trump has managed, with the able assistance of McConnell and Ryan, to completely humiliate the Republican Party in Washington to the point where they see an 8 to 10 point generic lead in the Democratic vote for Congress coming up in 2018, fear losses, and feel like they have to pass something, anything, so that they can say they did something. And at this point,
some logic, yeah.
Most of the Republican senators don't even care about what's in the bill. They don't know and they don't care. True. It's just they have to vote yes.
Well, Yeah, I mean, I guess that's really the only logic I can apply to it.
I mean, some of them are so fearful, like
logic
Gene
isn't
Heller,
there.
that he put his name on this thing so that you wouldn't keep calling him, asking him what he was going to do. Just leave me alone, okay? I co-sponsored it. Leave me alone.
Well, that won't work in terms of letting, or in terms of warding off calls. He's going to get them.
Well, for the short term. I mean, it's not going to help him
do you
get
think
reelected.
people will even know? I mean, they'll just call and they'll say, "I'm a sponsor of." Oh, I didn't know. Well, it sucks. So get off of it. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what he's going to do, but okay. It's logic. It's what happens in Washington.
Right. And so, the thing that pushes it to passage isn't the quality of the bill, is my point. It's the politics.
Right. Okay.
And so when you look at the actual quality of the bill, that's why you have some senators actually coming out and saying, don't worry about the CBO score. I could care less about the CBO score.
Mm-hmm. All right. That makes
Really?
sense.
I mean, normally with a policy that affects all Americans, you kind of would care about this. No, because it's going to be bad. So it's not, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the bottom line of it. 8 years of, you got to have the score because it's terrible, debt, deficit, yada, 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 and that all disappears too. I hear
they're going to replace dynamic scoring with magic scoring because that's even better for them.
Sure, why not? And if they can come up with an even better name for it, patriotic scoring. How about that?
Right. Anyway, what's in this thing?
I don't know.
So Graham, Cassidy, Heller, Johnson, I guess, is officially the thing. ACA repeal simple summary. This is by Andy Slavitt.
Yes, okay.
And the source is Center for Budget and Policy, CBO prior estimates. Repeal and replace, well, estimated 32 million people will lose coverage within 10 years.
That's
the official
a lot.
score isn't out yet, though.
Okay.
Ends Medicaid expansion. Healthcare for 11 million low-income adults. Ends all subsidies in the exchange, replaced by smaller and declining block grant. So they stop paying for people to get care. The block grant doesn't have to be spent on the same population as currently. Cuts coverage to low-income seniors, children, and people with disabilities by 7% by 2026 with a per capita cap. So not only does it cut the amount of money, but it also sets limits as to how much you can pay. And that's why people say one of the things that happens here is, let's say you're born with a kid with a disability. Then there's no guarantee that you can get insurance. And if you do, the insurance companies can raise your rates.
That's not what we wanted.
This isn't
That's
Trump
weird.
care. It's beautiful and better, but cheaper. Ends federal protections on pre-existing conditions, lifetime caps, essential benefits. 50% of states expected to do so.
Yes.
Ends all cost-sharing payments to low-income Americans. Ends all funding for coverage by 2026.
Bye.
Cuts $250 billion between now and 2026.
That's
In other
not
words,
much.
it gets even worse in 2027.
Yeah, so 2026. All right, well, we're beyond.
10-year window, right? For
Yeah. I guess that's really what they're looking at.
for bird baths
Must be
and
it.
reconciliation, right? That's why it's all 10-year windows. So this is gamed to make it look like you're spending less money over a 10-year period.
Okay.
Average state cut of 17% through 2026, 100% afterwards.
100%. Okay. That's
Got that?
normal. Yeah.
I mean, that's gaming the system. Averages will be dramatically different. 20 states estimated to lose 30 to 60% of funding to move money to rural red states. In other words, take it from New York and California. But other losers include, and remember the senators, Maine, Alaska, and Arizona.
Yeah. Well,
So now you're going to have to put extra money in the pot to go buy those senators. So that's what the game is right now. CBO has not estimated impact on premiums, but likely 20% spike next year. That's according to CBPP. Would likely be presented to the House as a take it or leave it if it passes the Senate. Provide no funding for recessions, natural disasters, public health emergencies, or price spikes. Oh, flu pandemic, wiping out everybody like 1918, too bad. It's up to the states.
Well, good old days.
Targets women's health family planning and uses the same 50 votes only partisan technique to pass. And the problem with that is it upends all the progress that Alexander and Murray are making on their own bill. In fact, Jeb Bush, I think, had an op-ed in The Hill today about how this is way better than any bipartisan plan possibly could be. Just, proving the point, it's all politics, and Republicans are not worthy of the position that they hold in Washington. Please remember that in 2018. That's about the nicest way I could say it.
Okay.
All of them. I mean, there's not a single one of them that is worth reelecting, because they are perfectly happy to throw every American under the bus in order to say Republicans got to win. Let's be clear. That's what the game is.
I guess so. I mean, as I'm looking through this thing and the way things drop off cliffs, with 100% cuts and hundreds of billions of dollars cut after the budget window. And by the way, after, most of these guys would have faced re-election already, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think I've ever seen anything as obviously written not to be taken seriously, that they basically say, well, we got to have one more vote. And if it passes, it passes. And if not, whatever. And the same game is going on where don't worry about the fact that we zero out all of these accounts after the budget window. We'll fix it again later, like the doc fix. The same excuse that outraged everybody when McConnell gave it last time, that don't worry about it. We'll never let that happen.
Right, that's what Cassidy is doing, and it's like, what are you talking about? How can you possibly do that with a straight face? And
anybody who said anything or even, nodded approvingly toward McCain saying, we got to have regular order, and now, I'm not going to vote for any bill that doesn't have it. It's nuts.
Right. To be fair, though, we don't know what McCain is going to do. We assume Collins and Murkowski are no's. And we don't know. Rand Paul says he's an absolute solid hard no, which is, of course, not to be believed. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what a handful of other people will do. Now, the other part of the game,
dang old uncertainty,
is to pretend that you have incredible momentum when, in fact, you don't, to try to convince everybody else that you have incredible momentum.
Yes, and that's the annoying part, because the role that Democratic senators have to play in that is, yes, they have incredible momentum, just in case they do.
And also, they have incredible momentum. Here's my fundraising email.
Yeah. Well, yes. Okay. Look, none of us are going to win from having this terrible thing being proposed. And we don't even win that. Well, we win our health care back temporarily, at least until they can find a new way to try to kill it. If we
right. Remember, they have to kill it by the 30th of September, so this is a limited time window. Buy it now because it's not going to be there after September 30th on the one hand. On the other hand, if this thing actually does pass, it'll become law. If it becomes law, this is a huge albatross around the necks of every Republican running for Congress in 2018, and all of a sudden the Senate becomes in play. I just don't understand why they're doing this.
Other than what you said at the top of the segment, that they feel like something has to happen or else they'll have to face the voters having done zero. That's it. But I mean, why? Oh, well, you didn't do anything in your term in office and I'm not going to vote for you. Well, hold on a second. I do have some matches. I burnt your house down. How about that?
Yeah. Speaking of house, it's like your house is built on a cliff and the only door out actually, walks right into over the cliff and you drop.
Okay.
And there you are sitting in the house saying, it's just so I got to get out. I got to get out for a walk. I've been in the house for weeks. I have to get out. I don't care what happens. I'll deal with it later. You open the door, you step out, and now it's time to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I'm out.
Yeah.
Fresh air.
This is when we, bring that echo back. Go play with Skype settings. This is when we need it. But, that's really what's going on here. And it's so weird and it's so bizarre. But in fact, that is what's happening. LOL GOP on Twitter writes, it's Don't Kill Me Congress Week again, a regularly scheduled event until the GOP loses one House of Congress.
I guess so. And not necessarily after that. Are we safe from that being the theme of the week? The other House of Congress, should it remain in Republican hands, will no doubt do this over and over. It will just be less worrisome.
Yeah, it'll be a lot less worrisome. Now, the CBO has not scored it yet, but what they have done is suggested that Obamacare uncertainty will lead to 15% hike in premiums. So while this is going on, things are getting worse, and you know who to blame, folks.
Yeah, I was going to say, what happened to the old uncertainty thing where we don't know what's happening and what's in the bill and who's going to vote for what and whether or not things are going to disappear after 10 years or they'll save it later. Right. I remember when that was all a big deal. Uncertainty really hurts.
Yeah, so you have that side. Now, on the other side, we have the increasingly worrisome to the White House Russia investigation.
That thing. All right.
So let me give you some stuff here. Okay. I guess the gossip story of the day, and the Washington Post did a very funny thing, but the gossip story of the day is that Ken Vogel, who used to work for Politico, now works for the New York Times, goes out to lunch at a steakhouse that happens to be, wait for it, next to the New York Times. And while he's at lunch.
All right.
Okay. The Washington Post actually had a separate piece with a graphic. It was like a satellite image. Here is the New York Times building. Here is the restaurant. And then they drew a line between them and said 171 feet, 1 minute walk, just to give you an idea of what's going on.
Someone could accidentally.
So Ken Vogel is having lunch, and who's at the next table? Why, it's Ty Cobb and another one of Trump's lawyers.
Honus Wagner. It was not him? Okay. I can't believe that guy's name
it was
Ty
Babe
Cobb.
Ruth and Ty Cobb. They're sitting together.
And there's only one parachute.
Right.
I think. Is how it goes.
And they're discussing Cobb's unhappiness with Don McGahn and the Trump legal team.
They are.
And
All
Vogel's just sitting there taking notes. It's like the Acela thing where, people are talking in loud voices on the don't talk car.
Yes.
You just have to assume it's Washington. There's always a reporter around. So Vogel's taking notes. Dissent inside the Trump legal team, he tweets. Ty Cobb complained that McGahn is withholding documents and has a spy on Cobb's team.
Okay, good job.
Cobb griped that McGahn is being very conservative, producing documents to Mueller, and two are locked in a safe. And Cobb can't get them.
Okay, continue.
And then this story goes out, and then people start yelling at Cobb for doing this in public.
Yeah.
Right? And so the Fred Barbash is writing this in the Washington Post. Trump lawyers spill beans thanks to terrible choice of restaurant next door to the New York Times is the story. And just the graphic is very, very funny. It's like a police whodunit, with the where and what. So I just posted that for you. You can take a quick peek. Huh. But, what does all of this mean? Well,
I don't know.
But we have people who can help us here. Renato Mariotti, who is an ex-federal prosecutor.
Really? Okay.
It's a whole thread on this.
Formula One driver?
Thread. What does today's New York Times story about clashes within the Trump team tell us, legal team? This New York Times article discusses some serious fractures within the Trump legal team. In particular, it discusses a clash between Trump lawyer Ty Cobb and White House counsel Babe Ruth. This is a key passage. Don McGahn. The friction escalated in recent days after Mr. Cobb was overheard by a reporter for the New York Times discussing the dispute during a lunchtime conversation at a popular Washington steakhouse. Mr. Cobb was heard talking about a White House lawyer he deemed a McGahn spy and saying McGahn has a couple of documents locked in a safe that he seemed to suggest he wanted access to. He also mentioned a colleague who he blamed for some of these earlier leaks and who he said tried to push Jared out. Now, the first and most obvious question is, what does McGahn have locked in his safe that Cobb wants?
It is, I don't know.
Tickets to the 1918 World Series. My best guess is the initial Fire Comey letter penned by Stephen Miller at Trump's direction with McGahn's comments and deletions. Okay. Discussed here in a separate thread, that letter and his testimony could be the most important evidence in the obstruction case.
Wow. Okay.
Federal Court of Appeals in D.C. is held that in a situation like this one, there's no privilege between McGahn and Trump. Obviously, we don't know exactly what the documents in the safe are. It's highly unusual for one lawyer on a legal team to hide the key information from another member of the team. It's also odd for there to be intense disagreement that boils over into public. This does not bode well for the Trump legal team. It also doesn't bode well that Cobb continues to embarrass himself publicly.
No.
I don't know if it's the name of the mustache, but, he apparently talks a lot in public and, in earshot of reporters. A lawyer's first job is to do no harm. If a lawyer is hurting his client, that's a huge problem. Cobb has repeatedly done that. Recently, he asked Natasha Bertrand of Business Insider if she was on drugs in a 1:30 email, and then he corresponded with a prankster And Cobb's public discussion of the battles with McGahn was another major error, which is why McGahn erupted at Cobb for it. McGahn privately erupted, says the Times, at Mr. Cobb, according to people informed about the confrontation who asked not to be named, describing internal matters.
Okay.
But he would add, we're happy to describe internal matters. John F. Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, sharply reprimanded Mr. Cobb for his indiscretion. Cobb sought to diffuse the conflict in an interview of the weekend, praising McGahn as a superb lawyer, said we have different roles. And Mariotti says, keep Cobb's foibles in mind as we discuss his main disagreement with McGahn, highlighting in the article the disclosure of documents. Cobb argues that the White House should be completely open with Mueller because there's nothing out there implicating Trump. That's consistent with the analysis he gave the prankster who pretended to be his colleague discussed here, a separate thread, where he candidly analyzed the Mueller investigation to somebody who then went ahead and published it. My gut reaction to Cobb's analysis is that it really means something. As I said in the thread I linked in the tweet above, he knows more than we know because he's seen documents and spoken to White House employees. But Cobb's many errors and lack of attention to detail have caused me to question his judgment. He might be speaking quickly without buckling down and doing his homework. And two other things. First, Mr. McGahn is keeping certain information from Cobb. Why? McGahn wants to fight on privilege. Maybe he knows that it's worth doing despite an uphill battle in the courts, because otherwise his own testimony might be problematic. And second, the culture of distrust in the White House appears to go beyond Cobb and McGahn. White House officials are worried about colleagues wearing wires.
I was wondering about that.
The uncertainty has grown to the point that White House officials privately express fear that colleagues may be wearing a wire to surreptitiously record conversations from Mr. Mueller.
Yes, maybe. I was wondering about that actually in the context of although, I mean, he's no longer in the White House, supposedly, but in the context of the Steve Bannon interview on 60 Minutes where everyone was saying, why is he wearing like 400 shirts? And my first thought was, that's where you would hide your wires.
Yeah, exactly.
But
given the mentality, many White House officials may be keeping things from Cobb. Lastly, what will happen when the document's in the safe? Typically, any document withheld based on privilege is logged in a list that the defense gives the prosecutor. If the prosecutor wants, he or she could go to court to get the document. Here, given the prior ruling from the appeals court, I'd expect Mueller to do so. End. That's pretty intriguing.
Yes. Here's a good comment we'll throw into that. Karen, who tweets us and says, what if the best Cobb CYA move is to be purposefully overheard by a reporter in a restaurant?
People have suggested that. Yeah. What if they send Mueller on a wild goose chase for nothing, wasting time?
Oh, that's true,
trying to run the clock out. I mean, there's a bunch of speculation about that. But this is a pretty serious investigation. I mean, I think no doubt about that. However, it's being played.
Why so many steaks for lunch? I find that too heavy for a lunch. I would be asleep in my office after a steakhouse lunch. That seems excessive to me, but okay.
Well, Ken Vogel is careful to point out that he had the tuna salad, and the rest of the thread there is not talking about Mueller's investigation. It's what would you eat if you were there, and what's your best and favorite meal. So, just to put things in perspective here.
Okay, but tuna even
it turns into a foodie, Twitter line.
Fair enough. I think it ought to have some discussion there. Steakhouse tuna salad, which I'm sure is good, but I don't know. I feel like maybe that came out of my subscription money or something. Okay.
Right. It's just nice to see in the Hill this big
I could do tuna
headline.
salad for less. Yes, that's
this
true.
Big headline: White House officials fear colleagues are wearing a wire from Mueller. I just, gives you an idea of the mindset of what's going on at the White House these days.
Somebody doesn't want to go to jail. There's got to be somebody that cares about going.
Yeah. Anyway, and then this same Renato Mariotti, as our break comes up, has a separate CBS News interview.
Renato. That's a great name.
Why a Facebook warrant could signal a turning point in Mueller's investigation.
All right.
A completely separate list of things to talk about, which maybe we'll get to after the break. But, I just thought that was together as a whole. Awfully interesting.
Yeah. Now, did you have that? Was that in your list too? Because I do feel like I had another of
I did. I sent a couple of things, but that was about the McGahn stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, separately, I do have that one, and I will just include it at the bottom. So maybe we'll get to that after the break, and you can have a sneak peek. There it is at the bottom.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that one because I knew I had seen the name, and I have another one of his tweet storms somewhere.
Yeah, I had it on the Pundit Roundup, and I keep seeing his name. I said, boy, this, it looks interesting. He's a former federal prosecutor, and now CBS is interviewing about this very same thing.
Yeah, he's having a hell of a week.
Starts its thread with why news that Mueller obtained a search warrant for Facebook content may be the biggest news in the case since the Manafort raid, and we'll get to that after the break.
Okay. Well, we got a minute or two before we have to go into that, during which time we can, of course, discuss the fact that the world is aflame over the Emmys appearance of Sean Spicer.
Yeah, normalizing. I got something on that, too, from Jay Rosen, and it's actually very, very short.
Oh, all right. Well,
So
we'll definitely want to talk about that. I am not sure how to deal with that one myself. All right, so we're about a minute from our break, but
I can do this. This is a 9-second thing, so I can make it a minute.
Let's do that, and I'll have
from Jay Rosen. It's called "Normalizing Trump: An Incredibly Brief Explainer," and this will take us right up until the music.
Okay,
there it is at the bottom there. Most every journalist who covers Trump knows of these things. He isn't good at anything a president has to do. He doesn't know anything about the issues with which he must cope. He doesn't care to learn. He has no views about public policy. Nothing he says can be trusted. And his model of leadership is a humiliation of others. Given all of that, and if nothing the president says can be trusted, reporting what the president says becomes absurd. You can still do it, but it's hard to respect what you're doing. And that's painful. If they can, people flee that kind of pain in political journalism. There's enough room for interpretive maneuver to do just that. That's normalization. That's what Tonight He Became President is all about. That's why he's called transactional.
Okay.
Well, I like that. It's a good explanation.
Okay, we'll be back with more after this break. All right, we're back with more from the Kagro in the Morning show right here on Netroots Radio. I like the way that music times out. It's almost as if we did this on purpose, that it gets nice and soft and then it comes back in dramatically just as we re-enter from the 2-minute break. Amazing. Thanks, Greg. Sounds like we squeaked the other stuff in just in time, and we were, before we left, about to go back to not Mario Andretti, but the other guy.
Renato Mariotti.
I have to learn the name. It's terrible. I'm sure
it's going to be a well-known name because he's got a lot to say, former federal prosecutor.
Yeah.
And he's very smart, and his Twitter feed is terrific.
He's been all over the place. I can't believe how quickly he came on. All right, let's head over then to the other weekend tweet storm of Renato Mariotti.
And this takes place on 16 September, which is right after the Wall Street Journal publishes a piece says Facebook gave Special Counsel Robert Mueller more details on the Russia probe.
Okay.
And Mariotti's commenting on this, again, from his viewpoint as a former federal prosecutor. He says, why news that Mueller obtained a search warrant for Facebook content may be the biggest news in the case since the Manafort raid.
All right.
Last night, the Wall Street Journal reported that Mueller obtained info from Facebook via search warrant. The Wall Street Journal talks about some of the info Mueller obtained. Mueller could not obtain content of an account without a warrant. Mm-hmm. It says, people familiar with the matter, says the Wall Street Journal report, Facebook policy dictates it would only turn over the stored contents of any account, including messages and location information, in response to a search warrant. Some of them said, a search warrant for Mr. Mueller would mean the special counsel now has a powerful tool in his arsenal to probe the details of how social media was used as part of a campaign of Russian meddling in the U.S. presidential election. And Facebook didn't share the same information with Congress, says this Wall Street Journal piece. Mariotti says, I was initially wary about discussing implications of the story because I worried Wall Street Journal may have presumed a warrant that didn't exist. But CNN has confirmed that Mueller obtained content via search warrant, including ads, account details, and targeting.
Okay.
Separate story there at CNN.
Yeah.
This is huge news. It means Mueller has concluded that specific foreign individuals committed a crime by making a contribution in connection with an election. It also means he has evidence of that crime that convinced a federal magistrate judge of two things. First, There was good reason to believe that the foreign individual committed a crime, and second, evidence of the crime existed.
Okay.
Why is that big news? Until now, Mueller's efforts to obtain information about Russian interference in the election could be seen as an effort to gain counterintelligence or investigate a matter unlikely to result in charges. Now we know he believes that he's close to charging specific foreign people with a crime. Can he do that? Yeah. If they committed a crime in the U.S., for example, he says, my former boss indicted Osama bin Laden for the first World Trade Center bombing.
Okay.
So what does this mean for Trump and his associates? The news also has large implications for them. It is a crime to know that a crime is taking place and to help it succeed. That's aiding and abetting. If any Trump associate knew about the foreign contributions that Mueller's search warrant focused on and helped that effort in a tangible way, they can be charged.
Aww.
In addition, anybody who agreed to be part of this effort in any way could be charged with criminal conspiracy. They wouldn't need to be involved in the whole operation or know everybody involved, but they would have to agree to be part of some piece of it. One thing I should note, this particular violation of the law preventing foreign contributions in connection with an election is far stronger than earlier speculation that Donald Trump Jr. violated the same law by accepting information from the Russian attorney. Mm-hmm. One hurdle is to violate the statute criminally. You have to do so knowingly and willfully. Here, Mueller has evidence that the foreigners had that intent, and it's far more difficult for an American to claim that he or she didn't know that a massive Russian influence operation was against the law than it would be to claim that about hearing talk of a meeting. Jurors would be inclined to convict anybody who was part of or aided a Russian effort to subvert our election. If I represented somebody who was caught up in this part of the investigation, I'd be very worried.
Huh.
And then gives the statute.
Okay. That does sound rather interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah. So basically, his point of view is what he's trying to do. And one of the reasons I find his Twitter thread so and feed so interesting and refreshing is that it's not the same thing as the Menschbot
no.
Twitter feed. There is an actual Menschbot Twitter feed, by the way. I don't know if you've ever followed it, but it's hysterical.
Okay.
It just puts random garbage together and tweets it out. You know,
that sounds like all bots, but okay.
Yeah. You know, today we learned that, the Supreme Leader of the Boy Scouts has put out a all points bulletin on Trump associates, that kind of thing. It just throws stuff together and just puts it out there and reads very similar to what you might actually read from, the Twitter account itself.
The real thing.
So this is a more sophisticated actual understanding of the law and how it works from the mind. It's like reading Preet Bharata, and people with that kind of level of expertise. And it looks similar, but one of them is meaningful and the other one isn't. So that's why I like to follow the lawyers here.
Okay, I can buy that. That's I thought the most interesting part of it was what would it have taken? Well, the two-part proof of one, this information would likely only be turned over as a result of an issued search warrant, and two, what would it take to get that warrant issued? What does it mean that it was issued? That's good insight. I'm not so sure that it necessarily means it results in charges, but I get his point that it certainly could, whereas the generalized counterintelligence review that Mueller was conducting or thought to be conducting to this point might result in a lot of tut-tutting and this person is at fault and so is that person, but there's nothing I can do about it. This holds out the promise. Although so far the targets would be foreign actors. And maybe, it's going to be awfully difficult to prove that anybody in the Trump camp did anything knowingly, because I don't know if anybody knows what the hell they're doing. But hopefully that'll get a loose definition, and they just have to be, cognitively aware of what they were doing.
Yeah, I found my Menschbot Twitter feed just to read you a couple, just because they're fun. Okay. Right. Exclusive, my military sources per exclusive reports. A sealed censure has been issued for Mr. President by the Hounds of the Alliance. Okay. Verified, highly reliable source. A writ of habeas corpus for aggravated grumpiness has been issued for the president. Breaking. Secret sources. A legal charge for unfathomable triangulation has been issued. I mean, they just take this stuff and throw it together, and I promise you, it's not really that different from the original.
No, it's not. I mean, as I recall, the marshal of the Supreme Court stopping people from getting on planes was, I think, the breaking point for a lot of people with Louise Mensch. Unfathomable triangulations. Pretty good.
It's hysterical. This one, breaking. According to GOP staffers, Mr. Trump is practicing shoplifting and will undergo retraining.
Well, made about as much sense as his weekend Twitter feed. So he's president.
Verified sources per White House staffers, a restraining order for forbidden expressionism coming for Stephen Miller. I mean, you get the idea of what's going on here, but they're pretty amusing. And again, I just contrast that with the list of an actual lawyer that I read a couple, from Mariotti.
Yeah.
And it's really very refreshing. It is.
It's funny. It actually reminded me a little bit of another video that circulated when people were critiquing the president's weekend idiot tweeting and the various idiots he retweeted, which was kind of an interesting story. One of the guys, saying that he retweeted this person just the other day tweeted this video, a guy at a town hall accusing John McCain, face to face at least, with treason and calling for his arrest. But the guy sort of reading out his bill of particulars. It's a little bit like that Mensch bot. What are you doing? So Menschmatron? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really very funny.
Highly
There's several of these, but this is one of the ones that I follow. Just very, very funny. Excellent. Anyway.
Yes.
So there's that. I don't want to, before I get off, I'm just about at the end of my segment. I don't want to forget about the anti-Semitic fellow who Trump was retweeting over the weekend with his golf swing, hitting Hillary in the head with a golf ball.
I think that's the guy we were talking about. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's important. And just going through my list of stories here, I'm going to end with Dan Dresner.
Dan Dresner, okay.
Dan Dresner, this is on the Pundit Roundup. Let me get this one for you. I did a Storify on it, a very, very short tweet storm on Trump and tweeting, because I don't know if you noticed, John Kelly was supposed to go in there and get everything into shape and fix the White House and stuff like that, and all of a sudden
that's what they
Trump
said.
is tweeting a lot of stuff, including this golf ball hit Hillary on head kind of stuff.
Yes.
Threatening people and, doing the Trumpy kind of thing.
Right.
So Dan Dresner, who's the professor at Fletcher School and writer of several books about foreign policy, and writes, the real Donald Trump is in a Twitter bender this AM, this was yesterday. Expect to see more of this in the coming months for 3 reasons. The first reason, he's coping with a bunch of things that have no upside for him, like North Korea, the debt ceiling. Tweeting lets him blow off steam. Second reason, tweeting is a natural way for Trump to soothe his base after he continues to cut deals in which he gets practically nothing.
Yes. And
the third reason, as his chief of staff controls his information flow, the more Trump will go to Twitter, a rare area beyond Kelly's purview. And one final thought, but it's an important one. It's striking how much weaker Trump seems on Twitter than he did 9 months ago. Trump used to tweet at a company and its stock price buckled. No one cares now. Trump promises something on Twitter, nobody believes him. What's changed in the past 9 months is that Trump has been proven to be a weak and feckless president. He's accomplishing very little. Trump's tweets no longer look like menacing threats from a dangerous bully. They look like absurd bombast from a pathetic bully. It's sad and scary that Donald Trump is president, but his Twitter behavior reveals his impotence as a leader. Remember that.
Okay. Inspirational.
Yeah, it is. I mean, he's awful, but luckily he's incompetent. So the incompetence outweighs the awfulness. This is a point that Quinta Jurisic and some of the people over at Lawfare made like the second day of his presidency. That they don't fear him as an autocrat because he's just too incompetent to really do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. You don't want to go to sleep on it, but I mean, he's not.
He
he's
dreams
not
of it, but he just can't pull it off because he's awful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that he's tried and failed at because he really doesn't know what's going on. There's a lot of things he's ruined quite, proficiently as well. But I don't know, maybe not proficient. He's done it. They're pretty well ruined, but not for his not as a mark of his ability to make surgical strikes against it. All right. Well, yeah, he's kind of a bumbling mess. That's a good thought. I mean, it is true that he no longer collapses stock prices on the strength of his threats. It was a very weird day yesterday, and the only thing I think that he authored himself was that weird, disjointed Rocket Man threat, which didn't seem to make any sense to anybody. And the rest of it was retweeting of idiots of various stripes, including one young woman who just, said, we love you and support you. But boy, if you had seen her Twitter feed before that, you would say, how did he even manage to take notice of this person? It makes me wonder about what he's doing with his spare time.
Well, it says we love you. That's all you need to know. Mm-hmm. That's all he saw, and that's what he was interested in. He doesn't really care about the rest.
I suspect he would have been very interested in the rest. I just wonder how he came to see it. It's not appropriate for, say, radio or presidents.
Not safe for work, are you saying?
Yes, but he's not working, so I guess it's okay.
Yeah, I suppose. So just to highlight the point, and let me just give you a brief digression here. It often comes up on the Pundit Roundup when I put it up on Daily Kos, which is a blog that people read and which is a feature that I talk about what smart people and pundits are saying, often in written prose, but occasionally on Twitter. And the commenters will say, why do you do so much Twitter tweeting stuff? And the simple answer is sometimes it's the only place you can find really good stuff. If these folks would sit down and write up their tweets into a major story, then I'd post that, but they don't. And sometimes it's just the easiest, quickest, simplest way to get to the nugget of what they're thinking. And so I gave you examples with Mariotti. He doesn't sit down and write articles, he tweets. Yeah, and sometimes the things are funny. Sometimes, like the Menschbot, you're not going to get an article about Menschbots.
We'll get an article about it, but not from the Menschbot.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we were just talking about from Dan Dresner about how Trump approaches Twitter, which I think is a pretty smart take. And here's an example. Okay, and this is from a fellow named Amos Yadlin, General, retired, Executive Director of Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies.
Okay.
So it's got some credentials, if you can believe the internet.
True.
It says, real Donald Trump and Netanyahu believe that the Iran deal is terrible and would be happy to annul it.
Yes.
They should listen to the security establishments in both countries that caution that such a strategy could have serious drawbacks.
Yes.
Fixing the deal is fantasy. It's not an agreement between the U.S. and Israel. It's between Iran and 6 powers.
Okay.
Leaving the deal is only the preferred strategy if the U.S. has an alternative strategy to keep Iran from the bomb. Mm-hmm. Even if the U.S. leaves the deal is not automatically annulled. The other powers may keep it, including lifting sanctions on Iran and cooperating with it. So, in order to succeed, and here's the key point, one must plan ahead.
Oh.
And just put that in perspective in terms of Trump and his presidency.
Yeah.
We should ask ourselves if it is in the Israeli and American interest that the Iranians, after they have been distanced from the bomb, though not enough, will make another break for nuclear weapons. In 2015, I recommended to the Prime Minister that instead of making speeches, he should sit with POTUS and the U.S. government to formulate a strategy. Then Netanyahu claimed he had nobody to work with in the White House. We now have an extremely supportive White House that understands the threat very well, especially in light of North Korea. We must not miss the strategic opportunity in 2017 by choosing rhetorical gimmicks instead. Important to formulate a comprehensive strategy. This demands determined action against Iran for all its malign activity not covered in the deal, ballistic missile program, Syria, support for terror, strengthening the enforcement of the deal, improving intelligence collection. Recommendation: the governments of the U.S. and Israel should reach an agreement that reaffirms that Iran won't be allowed to achieve a nuclear weapon. Now, it's not like this tweet thread is so profound. It simply makes the point that you can't get by on bombast. This isn't making a real estate deal where after you sell the property, you get to walk away. And it's your problem. You bought the Florida swamp, not me.
That's right. Jared, take care of this.
Take care of this, exactly. So here's somebody who has an Israeli perspective in mind. That is to say, that's the interest. And there may be interest in a better deal or a different deal or a more comprehensive deal. But even if that's the case, You simply don't just say, okay, this deal sucks, I'm walking away from it. Whether it's that or a climate deal from Paris, which was also over the weekend with Trump saying nonsense. And I think it was Benji Sarlin who pointed out Trump's superpower is you talk to him and everybody hears what they want. So maybe he talked about staying in the Paris Agreement. Maybe he talked about getting out. Maybe he talked about staying in with better circumstances. Truth is, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and therefore somebody who hears him doesn't know what he's talking about. And this is a skill he has honed over the last 30 years to sell stuff. The consequences are people tend, as Jay Rosen puts it, to try to normalize him because they're afraid of the alternative, which is admitting that he hasn't a clue and we're all in danger. Not because he's an authoritarian who's going to take over the country, but just because he's so inept, he's going to accidentally get into a crisis that he can't wiggle his way out of by going on Twitter.
Yeah.
And that is my depressing summary for today. That's where we're at. While this is happening, McConnell and Ryan are desperately trying for a win. The funny thing is that Trump's decided he can't work with them, and he has to work with Democrats at least for 24 to 48 hours. So how all of that is going to mix, we don't know. Is it all hype? We haven't a clue. Do they really have 49 votes? Maybe. They generally start out with 46 before they do anything.
Yeah.
But does that mean that they're going to pass this thing? Haven't a clue. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and we'll all learn a little bit about where procedure stands, at least now and under this parliamentarian. I can't promise you that it's going to be consistent with previous parliamentarians' rulings or that anybody's going to follow the precedents set here with respect to whether or not you can finish reconciliation after September 30th if you start before.
And don't forget, if you don't like the answer, you fire them and get your own parliamentarian.
Right. There's always that. Or just outvote them.
Yeah, you could do that too.
Weird.
Yes. Definitely worth paying attention to. Nobody should look away.
No.
We should at least follow what's going on. With that, this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my very good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. When we get together in those rare times that we're actually in person, it's the kind of stuff we talk about over breakfast.
Yeah, and it really happens. And you get to hear it.
And you get to hear it. All right. And sometimes, unlike when we have breakfast, with music. Take care, and I'll be back on Wednesday.
All right. Thanks very much. We'll see you then. We should have breakfast at expensive restaurants next to large newspapers.
We should, and we should also incorporate half-hour breaks into the discussion.
Yes, why not? So we can eat.
Why not? Yeah, exactly. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Greg. All right. Well, we're caught up at this point, I think, with the biggest of the big stories. I don't know. We'll see whether we missed anything. I'll check through Pocket. We'll check through your comments. I know there's some other things, some large, some small. I guess we'll get the Emmys thing out of the way. Sean Spicer showed up at the Emmys. I didn't watch the Emmys. I don't know. Award shows, not really my thing, but I love watching people watch them, of course, on Twitter. And I saw immediately that there was, justified outrage at Sean Spicer being there. So I sort of a mixed bag. Like celebrity Twitter was celebrity Twitter was kind of quiet. They were all at the Emmys. They weren't tweeting. They were all doing, and we were all watching them do and then getting outraged about it. I have mixed feelings about it myself. Ultimately, I guess I'm with the people who say, well, what are we doing normalizing this guy or just having a big laugh over what a liar he is, et cetera, et cetera. But then I am also brought back to, I don't know. Let's see. I kept coming back to Tina Fey and her sheet cake routine where people were outraged. Like, how can you dismiss activism by saying you should bury your concerns in sheet cake? But then it was, well, she's a comedian, she's only kidding. And it's one of those weird lines, like, where do you draw the line? People who I think were professionally, in the joke-making business, some of them said they understood, others said no. Others said, under normal circumstances, sure, but this is not normal. Lots of moving parts in all this. Sean Spicer doesn't belong anywhere in polite society and shouldn't be celebrated. That's true. But I got to say, and boy, was this an unpopular opinion. Hardly anybody expressed any interest in signing on to my observation from people who were outraged at celebrities, in some cases using their Emmy Awards acceptance speeches or other platforms beforehand, if they didn't happen to be the winner last night, to openly denounce the Trump administration and in some cases Sean Spicer himself, because he was such an egregious liar. And he was, no doubt about it. And then line up to take selfies with the guy and laughing and, yucking it up with him backstage, and how ultimately Hollywood that was. And I think all true, but I did see it. I felt like I was watching it come from quarters where I also feel, and I can't match it up person to person and say with certainty, I have seen the people who are now leveling this criticism do this thing, but I sure feel like I've spent a while on Twitter. So have you, maybe not necessarily Twitter or even social media, but you've seen this stuff. Am I misremembering seeing what I felt like were dozens of ironic selfies that people who are now resistance bloggers or style themselves as resistance bloggers or whatever, even if they don't adopt that term, clearly they're in opposition to Trump, and we hear about it all the time. Did they not used to take ironic selfies with Andrew Breitbart when he would, storm his way into Netroots Nation, or Ann Coulter when they would happen to encounter her somewhere, or if you ran into Anthony Scaramucci at a restaurant? Did people not do this? I'm fairly certain I saw lots of it, and maybe it's a different situation. But, think about all the people with whom people have taken outrageous, ironic selfies. Michelle Bachmann, Rick Perry, etc. I don't know. I mean, were we not in don't normalize this mode when Rick Perry was on Dancing with the Stars? Was he still normal enough that it was okay to normalize him, or do we not have that line available to us yet? We didn't know how bad he was going to get. I don't remember. I forgive everybody for this, by the way, because I'm sure, though I'm fairly certain I don't have any selfies like that in my past to point to, so I don't need to preemptively excuse myself for it. I don't go to enough events. I don't go out and mix with enough people that it's likely that I have such a selfie. But I can guess ahead of time without actually looking it up to see what selfies I can find and other snapshots of people, whether they're in the frame or not. But I can think of a lot of examples that I'm pretty sure I saw where I say, all right, well, you know what? I generally admire, agree with this person. They were stunned by the appearance of this celebrity. Celebrity does weird things. Even to other celebrities, celebrity does weird things. To people in general. If you're an actor and you're a Hollywood celebrity running into a Washington celebrity or some other type of celebrity, even when they're reviled among the general populace, there's something stunning about it. And sometimes, I guess it's akin to almost like a nervous laughter. I can't believe you're a real person. You're such a liar. I thought you were a Muppet. I need to take a picture with you just to prove that I was there. And surely everyone will recognize that it was ironic in nature, but I guess that they won't. I don't know. Justice sends me a message via Skype saying, what was it, a picture of Ted Bundy and Nancy Reagan? Is that what I didn't even know that existed. Although I bet once I see it, I'll say, yeah, okay, I remember that. But who knows what's out there? But I know I've seen bloggers and Twitter personalities that that you follow, that you're familiar with, who took lots of selfies at Netroots Nation or other places where they ran into notorious, and super awful, people who are figures in the worst of the alt-right right now. There aren't people who took selfies with Milo Yiannopoulos. There aren't people who took selfies with, I guess, Steve Bannon if they ran into him or snapped a picture of him at a restaurant. I know I've seen it. You know you've seen it. You might even have been in one. And it's okay. And I forgive the celebrities too, even though I guess you could try and draw a distinction by saying, well, my taking a selfie with somebody awful is not the same as giving them a platform on national television. I don't have the access that the Emmys have to do anything with, whether it's normalizing somebody who I have on or not. That's true, and that can't be disregarded. But and it also likewise cannot be disregarded. There will be people who are not particularly involved in politics, not particularly tied up in it, not political junkies like you and me and everybody else in the world, except for these guys, who will see it and say, oh, whether they'll actually think all is forgiven or whether they'll think, I don't even remember what that guy did anymore, even though the sketch was kind of about that. But those guys may have been lost to us from the beginning anyway. I don't know. I don't think it's nothing, and I also can't quite say it's no big deal. I wanted to point out the fact that I think I see that sort of thing happening more often than we originally thought, and maybe the circumstances were different, and maybe there's some mitigating factor, but there's something that needs to be examined, and maybe it's part of the normalization process that we need to kind of wrangle with. And it's human nature to want to do that. Resist that too. Resist this break, which is coming up. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Thanks for waiting with us through that top of the hour break. We are back, but we are back without Greg Dworkin and his guiding hand and trying to keep us on track with news that matters. So now I have to try and do this by myself and head over to Pocket and see what we can bring. There's plenty of things that are still on topic. The question is, can we construct a coherent narrative out of them? And the answer is, I don't yet know. Before we dive into that, let's catch up with this one short tidbit Kate Cheryl shares with us this morning. I did see this tweeted around earlier. One of those things that falls in the weird category of that's worth pointing out, but I don't know if I have, if I put this in Pocket, it's just going to become confusing and it will make it difficult for me to pick out the things that I really absolutely had to get done today. I need to color coding in some way, and I'm sure that exists in Pocket or some other similar app out there, and it'll become too complicated for me to use on the fly. Anyway, she points out that, now this is a question. She's pointing out Max Fisher's tweet that says, so far RT is the only outlet reporting this news. I did see it earlier, and I didn't put it in Pocket, so I'm not aware of what the outlet was. But RT, I guess it would make sense being the one to note this. The news is that Stanislav Petrov has died. Now, that does sound like a natural story for RT versus, let's say, the rest of the world, doesn't it? Because, for instance, you might say, well, that guy sounds Russian, and I don't know who he is. Well, that's part of the story, too. I'll give it to you here. The headline is, I was just doing my job. This will sum it up. Soviet officer who averted nuclear war dies at age 77. Here's the deal. Soviet officer who prevented a nuclear crisis between the U.S. and USSR, and possibly World War III, in the 1980s, has quietly passed away. That's often how people do pass away. He was 77. In 2010, RT spoke to Stanislav Petrov, who never considered himself a hero. We look at the life of the man who saved the world. How about that? A decision that Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov once took went down in history as one that stopped the Cold War from turning into nuclear Armageddon, largely thanks to Karl Schumacher, a political activist from Germany who helped the news of his heroism first reach a Western audience nearly 2 decades ago. Well, where is Karl today? We don't know. Let's see. On September 7th, here we are. Schumacher, who kept in touch with Petrov in the intervening years, phoned him to wish him a happy birthday, but instead learned from Petrov's son, Dmitry, that the retired officer had died on May 19th in his home in a small town near Moscow. On September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov was on duty in charge of an early warning radar system in a bunker near Moscow when just past midnight he saw the radar screen showing a single missile inbound from the United States and headed toward the Soviet Union. When I first saw the alert message, I got up from my chair. All my subordinates were confused, so I started shouting orders at them to avoid panic. It sounds like the opposite, but it seemed to have worked. I knew my decision would have a lot of consequences. Petrov recalled of that fateful night in an interview with RT in 2010. The siren went off for a second time. Giant blood-red letters appeared on our main screen saying, "Start." It said that 4 more missiles had been launched. He said from the moment the warheads had taken off, well, it would have been missiles, but okay, there was only half an hour for the Kremlin to decide on whether to push the red button in retaliation, and just 15 minutes for Petrov to determine whether the threat was real and report to his commanders. It's like war games, right? My cozy armchair felt like a red-hot frying pan, and my legs went limp. I felt like I couldn't even stand up. But, of course, the first thing you told us was that you did stand up. But, it's all rhetorical. That's how nervous I was when I started taking this decision, he told RT. Taught that in case of a real attack, the U.S. would have gone on an all-out offensive. Petrov told his bosses the alarm must have been caused by a system malfunction. I'll admit it, I was scared. I knew the level of responsibility at my fingertips, he said. It was later revealed that what the Soviet satellites took for missile launch was sunlight reflected from clouds. Seems like the sort of thing you would have programmed in from the beginning. But okay, Petrov's action, however, received no praise, and he was scolded for not filling in a service journal. His superiors were blamed for the system's flaws. My superiors were getting the blame, and they did not want to recognize that anyone did any good, but instead chose to spread the blame. For over 10 years, the incident was kept secret as highly classified. Even Petrov's wife, Raisa, who died in 1997, didn't know anything of the role her husband played in averting nuclear war. That was until 1998, when Petrov's superintendent, Colonel General, they got some interesting ranks there, Colonel General Yuri Votintsev, spoke out, and a report about the officer's quiet deed appeared in the German tabloid Bild. After reading this report, I was as if struck by thunder, Karl Schumacher wrote in his blog. I could not get rid of the idea that I had to do something for the man who prevented an atomic war and thus saved the world, says Schumacher, for whom nuclear threat was so real for decades. Schumacher flew to Russia to find the man who saved the world and found him living in a flat in Fryazino, best guess at the pronunciation there, northeast of Moscow. Schumacher invited Petrov to the German town of Oberhausen so that locals would find out about the episode of when the world was teetering on the edge of nuclear catastrophe. So then they went out to a steak dinner at the restaurant next to the New York Times building, and the rest of the world found out from there. Might as well finish the article. It's not that much longer. It's kind of fascinating, right? During his stay in Germany, Petrov appeared on local TV and gave interviews to several daily newspapers. Global recognition followed that trip with major awards. It's a major award presented to him. In 2006, the Association of World Citizens, I think I'm in that association, handed him an award which reads, "To the man who averted nuclear war," in the UN headquarters in New York, where Donald Trump is going later this week, right? In 2012, Petrov was honored with the German Media Prize, also awarded to Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, and Kofi Annan. Next year, he received another accolade, the Dresden Peace Prize, with the prize given by a 25-year-old Dresden resident who belongs to the generation that would not have survived had it not been for Stanislav Petrov. Curious about some of these organizations. Based on his story, the movie The Man Who Saved the World premiered in 2014, featuring actor Kevin Costner. I do not remember that. The actor sent Petrov $500 as a thank you for making the right decision. Well, at first, when people started telling me that these TV reports had started calling me a hero, I was surprised. I never thought of myself as one. After all, I was literally just doing my job, Petrov said. That's true. So, $500. Pretty good. That's a link, by the way. to compravda.eu. Do I even dare to hit some of these links? Am I going to get? I feel like I'm going to get investigated just by reading this story. $500. That's pretty random. I think it's worth more than $500. But what do you think would be an appropriate level of gift to give somebody who saved the world from nuclear annihilation? And under what criteria should you decide whether they actually did that? This sounds pretty clear cut. Okay. $500. I mean, what did I send him? Nothing, right? So Kevin Costner did a lot better than I did. Do you remember this movie? You ever heard of this one? The movie The Man Who Saved the World premiered in 2014. It seems to me like, all right, time for some online on-air research. We're going to IMDb to see if they're, I guess it's RT. Should we check and see, is there such a movie? The Man Who Saved the World. Let's look up the title. I mean, I have no doubt that that is being used as a title out there. There it is. The Man Who Saved the World, 2014. Stanislav Petrov. He appears in it as well. Kevin Costner. I'll click on it in a minute. There's a lot of saving going on. The Man Who Saved the Paradise is on there. Kardashian, the man who saved O.J. Simpson, is on there. Don't forget that, by the way. We forget that about the Kardashian family. The Man Who Saved Christmas, a Jason Alexander vehicle from 2002. The Man Who Saved Ben-Hur. How about that? The Man Who Stopped World War III revealed / The Man Who Saved the World. That's a 2012 film, which, who's that about? There's also The Man Who Saved Geometry. Thanks a lot. And The Snowman Who Saved Summer, which I believe is probably also a documentary. What about The Man Who Stopped World War III revealed? The Man Who / The Man Who Saved the World, a 2012 film. Is it about the same guy? Marking the 50th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is the untold story of how one man saved the world from nuclear apocalypse. Wow. There's a lot of nuclear apocalypsing or near apocalypsing that goes on around here, and this is a different one. So this guy was the first one to save the world, and that's why his documentary came in 2012, whereas it took another 2 years to get around to the Kevin Costner one. This one sent me all the way back. I want to see this one. The Man Who Saved the World. Once again, let's look at the Kevin Costner one, because it rings no bells. Like, not as a Nobel Prize. I don't see anything about this. Highly rated, 7.8, I guess, out of 10. Few people knew him, yet hundreds of millions of people are alive because of him. The actions of Stanislav Petrov, a retired Soviet military officer, prevented the start of a worldwide nuclear war and the devastation of much of the Earth. It's the review of Mr. Anonymous. They are a very big help. Okay, well, I don't know how much more we can find out about it, but yeah, Kevin Costner. I mean, I guess it's just like a short Is it short? Documented. Look at this cast, the number of people who appeared in it. How did we not? I mean, I guess it didn't get like theatrical release because it was a documentary, and they don't often do that. Stanislav Petrov, of course, appears in it. Although then there's another actor who appears as him, I guess, in his younger days. Kevin Costner appearing as himself in this one. Walter Cronkite is in there. Robert De Niro. Matt Damon. Ashton Kutcher. I would not have guessed at that either. All listed in top cast. Are there other celebrities that we might recognize who were in there? I don't think so. But was maybe Natalia Veselnitskaya got a role in that one at some point, and we just don't know about it. Anyway, very interesting. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Kate. It was newsworthy, and not likely to be. I don't know. Maybe it will now be reported elsewhere. And please don't investigate me just for reading RT. That's very un-American, and it's Kate's fault anyway. Arrest her. How about that? That was pretty brave of me, did you think? Okay. I know there are other stories out there that we wanted to get to, and there are lots of them. Let's see. Things that, in the spirit of interesting Twitter threads, let me add another one to the collection that Greg brought us. This is sort of at random as well, but I thought this was an interesting observation and a good one from Dan Shapiro. Dan Shapiro is a former U.S. ambassador under the Obama administration to Israel, and so an experienced foreign policy hand. Are there any other qualifications of his that I ought to mention? Let's see if we can bring up his bio here. On the Obama National Security Council as well. So quite extensive in his foreign policy chops, as it were. So we can bring up this thread that he began with yesterday. We continue to learn more about Team Trump's foreign policy activities during the transition. And as you might have guessed, it's a mess. And the transition figures prominently in the latest Trump-Russia news. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's just look at this quick thread. Good basis for understanding, again, why it can be so dangerous to, not always, but that it's not always something to celebrate, to say, let's put somebody with zero experience in charge just to, quote unquote, shake things up. Well, you can shake up a lot of things that you didn't intend to shake up. Secret meetings with the leaders of the UAE and Jordan have now come to light, and I have more to add to this, but you know why the UAE meetings were important. We discussed it at the end of last week, and there was some discussion about adding Jordan into the mix, I think, before we ended the show yesterday. But secret meetings with the leaders of UAE and Jordan, negotiating with Israel, Egypt, and others, a parade of meetings with Russia, attempts to establish back channels through shady characters, and God knows what else. During the Obama transition in 2008 and into 2009, our mantra was, we have one president at a time. I remember that being the mantra. Today, that notion, of course, seems quaint. But we were at pains not to interfere with the Bush administration's conduct of actual policy, to the frustration of many foreign governments. They wanted early insight into, and of course influence on, emerging Obama policy. We would not provide it. Beyond some meetings with informed outsiders close to the Obama team who remained in listening mode, they had to be patient. Why be so cautious? Here's the good stuff. A transition is not fully staffed, even for a competent president, I would add. A transition is not fully staffed. That does not have access to the full range, I guess, of U.S. intelligence. It cannot follow up via embassies and other diplomats. In other words, if you need to clarify your comments or revise and extend your remarks or even reclaim your time, one of the more now popularly shared terms of art from parliamentary procedure, but you can't follow up with embassies and other diplomats. There are limits on secure communications that you can have with other governments, and there's no ability to use economic or military levers to back your stuff up, to say nothing of the fact that the president-elect is not actually empowered to do anything on behalf of the U.S. in this period. Trying to conduct coherent foreign policy under such circumstances, besides being inappropriate, is impossible, as Trump's team learned and proved. Well, I should say, he said proved. They didn't learn it at all. That's just a slip of the tongue from me. And Shapiro continues, we see that with every report that emerges about what was going on, it was a rollicking mess. It interfered with actual policy. It was not informed by intelligence or experts working on these relationships. And it continues to produce embarrassing revelations months later. The nuclear Marshall Plan that we were discussing at the end of last week, which is so stupid sounding. Even without Flynn's likely corruption and questions about Kushner's conflicts, a truly ill-advised course of action. That's the end of the thread. It's not that lengthy, but well worth observing and using as context for further discussion of Trump-Russia and that crazy nuclear deal, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. There are so many other things that I need to add in all this. Where should we even go? Shall we? Let's get on record here. I think this may have broken after the show, but BuzzFeed had Friday afternoon more information about the Marshall Plan and the Jordan part of it. Trump advisors secretly met with Jordan's king while one, that would be Flynn, was pushing a huge nuclear power deal. This is Jason Leopold, Chris McDaniel, Anthony Cormier, 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 did you say Cormier, perhaps, over at BuzzFeed News. And, well, let's take a look at it. Michael Flynn, Jared Kushner, and Steve Bannon met with King Abdullah II, while Flynn was reportedly pressing for a controversial for-profit deal to build nuclear power plants in the Middle East. And don't forget, also in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hampton Roads, Virginia. Terrible idea all around. In the days leading up to Donald Trump's presidential inauguration, when his soon-to-be National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was reportedly pushing this big deal, Flynn and two other top Trump advisors held a secret meeting with the King of Jordan. The meeting, details of which have never been reported, is the latest in a series of secret high-stakes contacts between Trump advisors and foreign governments that have raised concerns about how, in particular, Flynn and senior advisor Jared Kushner handled their personal business interests as they entered key positions of power. And remember, neither one of them reported any contacts with foreign agents of any kind until they were pressed on it and they realized, I've been caught dead to rights. And on Jared Kushner's part, anyway, he said, oh, yes, I forgot to mention I met with over 100 foreign officials during that period. Anyway, the nuclear project raised additional security concerns about expanding nuclear technology in a tinderbox region of the world. One expert compared it to providing a nuclear weapons starter kit. That would be a bad thing to do. On the morning of January 5th, Flynn, Kushner, and former chief strategist Steve Bannon greeted King Abdullah II at the Four Seasons Hotel in Lower Manhattan. Why? Trump doesn't even own that. Is that because there were no eyes on it? Maybe. But you can't really be missed entering the Four Seasons with the King of Jordan. They then took off in a fleet of SUVs and a sedan to a different location. I guess they were trying to shake the coverage. People close to the three Trump advisors say that the nuclear deal was not discussed, but a federal official with access to a document created by a law enforcement agency about the meeting said that the nuclear proposal, known as the Marshall Plan, was one of the topics the group talked about. It's possible that they spoke about the Marshall Project and only Flynn had enough of an idea or even knew in the first place or remembered or whatever or cared what the plan actually was, and the rest of them may have had no idea or were just playing dumb. Can't tell just yet. The Wall Street Journal reported that while Flynn's White House disclosure forms state that he stopped working on the deal in December of 2016, that really actually, honestly, should not even matter because he's meeting with them the very next month. He, in fact, continued to push it even after he entered the White House because he just truly believed in it. Maybe. Who knows? Flynn's lawyer declined to comment on the claims in the Journal story. The plan, for which Flynn was reportedly paid as a consultant, initially envisioned that the reactors would be built by U.S. companies and security would be provided by the Russian state-owned firm Rosoboron. I'm not anywhere near sure how you would pronounce it because it looks like Rosso, R-O-S-O, like maybe Russian or whatever, and boron, which is boron the material that they make nuclear reactor control rods out of that absorbs the fissionable material and stops the reaction? I don't know if that was intentional. Like, are they a Russian state-owned firm formed with the intent of guarding nuclear installations or clamping down on proliferation activities? I wonder. Or whether it's just coincidence or am I just completely wrong about what boron is? That's entirely possible too. Not moron, boron. That happens a lot every time boron comes up. But Rosoboron is, I guess, actually an arms exporting outfit that's currently facing U.S. sanctions. So just doing business with them alone on anything, much less on privatizing nuclear non-proliferation activities and building fuel enrichment plants all over the world and in the middle of giant American naval bases. All of that aside, just dealing with this company would be a problem, right? As the plan evolved, Russian involvement reportedly lessened, and it is not known whether Russia or its companies featured in the meeting with the Jordanian king. This week, Democratic members of the House Oversight Committee said they would turn over documents about the nuclear plan to Special Counsel Robert Mueller. contending that Flynn may have violated federal law by not disclosing foreign trips and meetings. While it's not unusual for an incoming administration to meet with foreign dignitaries during the transition, hence the brief pause for some context before we begin the story, Trump surrogates have repeatedly failed to acknowledge these contacts. Attorney General Jeff Sessions at first said he did not discuss campaign matters with Russian officials, only to later acknowledge that at least 2 conversations with Ambassador Sergei Kislyak had occurred. The United Arab Emirates set up a meeting between a military contractor close to the Trump administration and a Russian close to President Vladimir Putin, talking about Eric Prince and the Seychelles meeting, of course. And this week, CNN reported that Abu Dhabi's crown prince, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, visited with Flynn, Kushner, and Bannon without alerting the American government beforehand. UAE's representative there. Okay. The meeting with the King of Jordan had extremely high stakes, a discussion with the head of a key American ally that might have included plans about spreading nuclear power to one of the world's least stable regions, possibly with the help of one of America's main geopolitical enemies, Russia. The revelation of the meeting comes as Abdullah plans to visit the United States next week and speak with Trump. An eyewitness who saw the trio of Trump advisors that morning in the bar of the Four Seasons in the morning had a brief exchange with Bannon, also said that at least half a dozen other people were with them. It's not clear who they were. BuzzFeed News reached out to attorneys and spokespeople for Flynn, Kushner, and Bannon, as well as the White House special counsel Ty Cobb, again, and Bannon himself. None of them would comment on the record. Did they try eating lunch next to him? They might get their answer that way. The only known public acknowledgement that Abdullah had left his country is a short note on his website, reading, His Majesty King Abdullah on Saturday arrived back home after a private visit abroad. Officials at the Jordanian embassy did not return multiple calls seeking comment. Kushner initially failed to disclose any meetings with foreign officials on his security clearance form. He later amended the document to include more than 100 foreign contacts, including Abdullah. In a statement sent to congressional committees in July, Kushner wrote that an assistant inadvertently had sent the security clearance form before it was finished, before it had anybody on it at all. And that Kushner, quote, made every effort to provide the FBI with whatever information is needed to investigate my background. Flynn applied for a new security clearance in January of 2016, and lawmakers said he failed to note even a single foreign government official he had contact with in the 7 years prior to submitting his security clearance application. It's not known what foreign contacts Bannon noted on his clearance forms because the White House has not even released them. 3 individuals, one close to Flynn, a second close to Kushner, and a third close to Bannon, denied that the nuclear deal came up in the meeting with the Jordanian king, but the source familiar with the law enforcement document said participants talked about Israeli-Palestinian relations, intelligence sharing between America and Jordan on Syria and ISIS, and the nuclear proposal. The nuclear project may have been the most controversial subject. Newsweek first reported that Flynn tried to broker the deal, which promised up to $200 billion in U.S. nuclear export opportunities and a new expanded security relationship. Politico reported that he said he was paid at least $25,000 by one of the American companies involved in the project, the now defunct Exco Dynamics / Iron Bridge Group. Representatives of that company did not respond to messages requesting comment. Nuclear plants were to be built in Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and 3 other countries in the region. In April of last year, the head of Jordan's Design and Development Bureau, Major General Omar al-Khalidi, Khaldi, was copied on emails saying the plan was designed to solidify the region under a security construct that would be led by 2 superpowers. You know the whole deal, what that was supposed to be. The emails were released by the Democratic lawmakers on the House Oversight Committee. Well, we'll continue with this story and more about it after our last break. Welcome back once again to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, let's see if we can get that music back down again and not too much microphone fumbling. Seems like we've got the break thing just about down, so knock on some wood if you can find it. And going to be working on seeing if what else can we automate in all this so that I don't have to rely on the alarms. Seem to be working pretty well. I don't know whether you guys can actually hear the alarms going off on my iPhone. I try to keep it silent, but it vibrates and it creates all sorts of disturbance. It's loud enough for me to hear it. Means it might be loud enough for you to hear it, but we can maybe smooth that edge out later anyway. But so far so good on the brakes. I think everybody's at least at our favorite station in Rochester, New York, WRFZ. I think they're pretty happy with the way things are going. That is to say, I have had no complaints. You don't get a lot of, there's not a lot of call or emailing and saying everything's working the way it's supposed to be going. You're doing your job. Good work there. Because, well, I mean, I'm not really even doing any work for them. I don't know. I'm doing this work, but we have no employee-employer relationship here. There's no back channels. We need some back channels to privately discuss how well I am not talking during the break, I guess. Okay, let's pick up with the end of the BuzzFeed news article. There is a little bit more information in here that I think belongs in our files for full context. In order for such a nuclear plan to move forward, like this Marshall idea, right, Congress would have to ratify a deal similar to one signed in recent years with India and the UAE. It's interesting, right at the beginning of that sentence, I thought, in order for this to happen, it would have to be ratified by Congress. And that's never going to happen, right? Because everybody knows they would never. Oh, wait, we do have similar deals, and the UAE is one of them. What are they doing brokering this deal? Or maybe they want to expand the number, or is it just a way to get Eric Prince paid and all of this? What's the use of having them broker this meeting? Or maybe it is about something else. I don't know, but it seems that there are such agreements in place. They are known as a 123 agreement. I imagine that they're not calling it a 123 agreement. 123 meaning it is named for a section of the United States Atomic Energy Act, which requires countries sharing American technology and fuel to take steps to prevent them from being used in weapons. That makes good sense. The U.S. has similar agreements in place with two other Arab nations, Egypt, named in the deal, and Morocco, which I don't recall being a part of this deal. Proponents have said the plan could bring new security to the region. That's their idea. That's their thinking. By bringing disparate countries together in a shared project under American guidance. USA. But critics believe the deal could provide nations that do not currently have nuclear weapons with the raw materials to make them. Any proposal to introduce dozens of nuclear reactors to the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, raises many proliferation red flags, says Darrell Kimball, executive director of the Nonpartisan Arms Control Association. The Saudis do not need nuclear power, and them gaining access could lead to dangerous consequences down the road. I will say, in all fairness, there was really no indication in the prior articles that the Saudis actually had any interest in doing this either. But everyone else was interested in them doing it because they were the main source of money in all of this. People were in this deal on the American side to get rich. Maybe they really believed in the idea of somehow increasing security. I don't know. But without the Saudis, there's no riches. And if the Saudis aren't particularly interested, why do you push them? It's not a good idea. Well, because there's riches involved. Anyway, we'll continue and conclude with this article here. The Saudis didn't need nuclear power. Them gaining access could lead to dangerous consequences down the road. The reason there is concern is that nuclear energy capacity is like giving a country a nuclear weapons starter kit, said Alexandra Bell, Senior Policy Director at the nonprofit Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. In the original proposal, American companies would have joined a consortium, including the Saudi government and Russia, to build 40 nuclear power plants in the region. The deal ultimately fizzled. Shortly after Trump took office, the White House publicly announced a visit by Abdullah. The February visit included meetings with John Kelly, then the Secretary of Homeland Security, and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. In a statement summarizing Trump's meeting with Abdullah, the White House said, President Trump underscored that the United States is committed to strengthening the security and economic partnership with Jordan. That's it. That's kind of a throwaway ending. There wasn't much in the way of information about the meeting with Jordan. It doesn't really even hint at this thing. But yeah, seems like a pretty crazy idea, and it seemed, I think, pretty obvious to the arms control people. And that's without even getting into what potential there is for non-governmental actors, shall we say, to get a hold of some of this material, even, whether in a sophisticated way, like our scientists have gotten a hold of some of this fissionable uranium and are using it to breed plutonium or other weaponized isotopes for bomb making, or whether it's just, we'll just take dirty radioactive material and make the infamous dirty bomb out of it. That's not likely to happen as among governmental actors, but what about the non-governmental actors? What do we do? I mean, a lot of these governments have been on the brink before. Supposing the Saudi government at some point collapses or is overthrown, and I don't know, political extremists, are there any in Saudi Arabia of any kind, somehow now gain the keys to the government and or just take them, legitimately or otherwise, and if they find themselves in control of certain nuclear facilities, well, aren't we going to feel stupid at that point? And then, of course, we'll have inquiries going on for years on end in Congress about why did Hillary Clinton give the stand-down order and order our mercenaries to surrender those nuclear power plants. We'll be blaming her for that for the next 25 years. You can see it doesn't look likely to work out well. I'm glad that they brought this up, though, and included Jordan. It does create still more confusion and doubt, but look, we got to get these things on the record and see if we can't. We could always rely on Mueller and his team to build a coherent narrative out of it, but what fun would that be if we couldn't speculate on it a little bit? Okay, lots of other directions we could go, many major stories that we will not be able to cram in. Let's get at least to some of these things, and perhaps we can do a little bit of lightning round and a little bit of ending the show on perhaps a longer read. Here's an interesting headline I picked up from the Washington Post. Just thought I would share this one with you. I don't even know if I want to know what the substance of this is. Juliet Alperin has this one, a headline: shrink at least 4 national monuments and modify a half dozen others, Zinke tells Trump. We're talking about Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke and his recommendation that President Trump modify 10 national monuments created by his immediate predecessors, including shrinking the boundaries of at least 4 Western sites, according to a copy of the report obtained by the Washington Post. Want to know what they are? We might as well take a look. The memorandum, which the White House has refused to release since Zinke submitted it last month, does not specify exact reductions for the 4 protected areas Zinke would have Trump narrow. Utah's Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante, Nevada's Gold Butte, and Oregon's Cascade Siskiyou, Cascade Siskiyou, or the 2 marine national monuments, the Pacific Remote Islands and the Rose Atoll, for which he raised the same prospect. The 2 Utah sites encompass a total of more than 3.2 million acres, part of the reason they have aroused such intense emotion since their designation. Well, we all know that the Bundy clan will be upset about increases in any federal holdings. And there may be arguments to be made for reducing the size of these things. It might not be entirely necessary, or I'm sure there's good arguments for keeping them exactly the way they are. I'm just curious, where are all of our alt-right friends who are worried about, oh my God, our monuments, our history? People are not going to understand history if these monuments are diminished in size in any way. We've got to rally to their defense. Get your tiki torches and let's go. Surprisingly, little defense of those monuments. And look, you know what would be funny is those guys would actually argue, well, they don't represent any kind of a history. Well, clearly they do. They're monuments of something, right? Natural history. Oh, natural history. That stuff's dumb. It's got to be able to, if it's not in a book and there's no great men to make statues of, then it's not real history. You know how those guys think about these things. Ironic, but it won't change any minds to show them that they're being hypocrites. What else have we got here? Another short hit, one that I actually should have shared with Greg, although he would have said, yeah, I know. It's true. This was an interesting tweet, kind of out of the blue for me, but it was a hell of a statement. Megan Day, who with whom I am not familiar, but who describes herself as a writer on the left, and there's very little else, so I don't know. MeganDay.com will probably give me more information about that, but suffice to say, she's a writer with an avid following and a verified presence on Twitter. I was asked over the weekend, by the way, how is it that I have managed to avoid getting the blue check mark of verification, that's all capitalized, on Twitter? I don't know, and I don't think I should spend any time caring about that, but I have wondered from time to time, like, why is that person verified and not me? Except I'm me. I verify it to you, and it's a lot more fun to play the unverified game, I think. Nobody's listening to me anyway, so it doesn't make a difference. And there's a certain circle of journalists and officialdom that I guess will only listen to people who are verified, but that doesn't mean they listen to everyone who's verified. The check mark will change nothing for me about the way I operate or who listens to me. So we'll leave that aside. But it was a good question. I don't know the answer. That's what makes it a good question. Such a challenge to figure out. Megan Day, I was talking about Megan Day when I started on this, made this very interesting observation on what I don't know. I don't know what this piece is that she has screen capped here, but perhaps I should see if I can search it and find out what it is. Or maybe we'll just do that off air and we'll provide a link if we can. But here's the point. We wanted to make a quick hit of this. She says, God, the dystopian gruesomeness of this just dawned on me. And she summarizes the point here by saying, or underinsured patients often donate organs and marrow, but rarely receive. Here's the clip that she has screen capped here, written by a doctor who worked in some of these hospitals that largely serve an or underinsured populace. Despite many improvements, it reads, largely because of Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, many services such as screening, colonoscopies, and hip replacements are still beyond reach for patients and their doctors. I spent a decade at Mount Sinai Hospital, a not-for-profit hospital in the poor North Lawndale, a neighborhood of concentrated poverty in Chicago. Sinai cares for a mostly minority population that is mostly uninsured or on Medicaid. And then she highlights this last section here. In my 27 years at these two safety net hospitals, not one of my patients received an organ or bone marrow transplant. Yet the organs that fed the transplant centers across the region came from the dying patients in these hospitals. Our patients, the poorest of the poor, gave, but they never received. And in a certain way, of course, that stands to reason, in precisely because we're talking about uninsured or underinsured people, that they're just not going to be in a position to undergo these very expensive treatments, even if they're, the insurer of last resort can step in. And of course, a lot of times there are, multiple other health problems involved that make them less than ideal candidate for transplant. I'm sure there's lots of medical reasons, and I'm sure they feed on itself. Seems like I would bet that there's a vicious cycle going on. They are very often not candidates for transplant for a number of reasons, not simply the lack of insurance, but the other medical issues that are going on that would complicate or considerably lower the risk of success of such a procedure. But those conditions themselves are also very likely due to or contributed to by the lack of insurance and the environment in which they live and the healthcare desert in which they may have spent the bulk of their lives. But yeah, ultimately, bottom line is people die here younger and more often and what organs they have that are not affected by the conditions that killed them are harvested and farmed out to the rich people of the region. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. Nobody actually necessarily plans it that way, but it's certainly the only foreseeable outcome from the system that we happen to have. And by the way, I think adding universal insurance or single payer insurance won't solve this problem quickly. It may not solve the problem at all, because it seems like there's so many other factors involved in it that may ultimately be intractable, but you can at least begin to address it. But it's going to be years, decades before, even under a working, functioning, and ideal system of universal health care, no matter how it's structured, it's going to be decades before people who just happen to be poor or have low incomes are also in health parity, let's say, with people who have considerably more, whether middle class or 1%ers or what have you, if it ever happens at all. I don't know if universal coverage can solve everything, or universal access to care can solve everything, but you're going to have to grow up with consistent universal access for everyone, and have exercised that option and taken good care of yourself and the others around you, and not have been impacted by environmental racism to a greater or lesser extent than others. In order for it to begin to even make medical sense and economic sense, the coldest possible kind of economic sense, for those for those donated organs to stay where they came from. It's really an amazing fact, and you can see how much factors into it. I thought it was a really sort of, certainly very disturbing, and it was sitting right in front of our noses, and we didn't really realize it, and it is rather dystopian, isn't it? I mean, people, an entire medical care desert that's maintained that way, not necessarily intentionally, but certainly damn close to it if you really look at it objectively. Why did you set policy this way? Why is it that so many other societies on Earth have recognized for so much longer than we have that there's a necessity of making access to healthcare a right for everybody? And look at what shakes out of this is that you ultimately end up with, we'll keep the poor alive long enough to maintain and grow organs to service the rest of the rich transplant market. That's sort of the bottom line of it. Pretty weird. Not something that you normally would do a quick lightning round hit on, but I don't have any more information on that one. But I don't know. That one hit me so hard that I felt like I wanted to include it on a Monday, as depressing as it is. And as much as it takes away time from other things that we really need to try to squeeze in here. Let's get to this one. I think maybe the last of the larger stories we can get in before time runs out, but I think we got to get it in quick before things start to roll so that you get the news before it becomes big time mainstream news everywhere. It started here. I saw this tweet from Pamela Vogel. Pamela Vogel is, let's scroll over and see if we can tell you. Research fellow at Media Matters for America. And I thought this was a good catch. A catch of a tweet from Angus Johnston, who tweets under the handle of Student Activism, describes himself as historian and advocate of American student activism, CUNY professor. And, let's see, not much more. But look at this. Pam says, for any reporter eyeing Milo, Yiannopoulos, or Berkeley Free Speech Week, is that supposed to be this week? Is that the deal? This thread is extra required reading. Don't be a pawn, Pam warns. She's talking about Angus Johnston's tweet storm that begins here. So this story from the Daily Cal, not the Daily Caller, that terrible rag, but the Daily Cal from I guess, is that the Berkeley paper or is that the system-wide? I think it's the Berkeley student paper there, right? Let's open it and find out. Make sure that we know what we're talking about here. Daily Cal is UC Berkeley's independent student-run newspaper. Yes. Okay. So, where were we on this? Let's get back to Angus Johnston's tweet storm. So this story from the Daily Cal may turn out to be crucial context for a coming free speech on campus brouhaha. Full speaker list released for Free Speech Week at UC Berkeley. This is their headline, the Daily Cal. Milo Yiannopoulos confirmed Thursday a full list of speakers scheduled to appear at UC Berkeley during Free Speech Week from September 24th through 27th. So we actually had some time on this one. But here's the deal. If you write or tweet about PC, political correctness, on campus, you need to read this piece, says Angus Johnson, because there's a good chance it's going to blow up in 2 weeks. He wants you to be ahead of the curve, too. Here's what's up. Milo Yiannopoulos has released a list of 24 speakers for his Berkeley Free Speech Week, scheduled to start in 9 days. And this was tweeted on Friday, so 9 days from then. The list itself is interesting. There are a bunch of obvious names, out and proud bigots and troglodytes like Bannon, Coulter, and Cernovich. But alongside them are some folks who have, up until now, tried to present themselves as more scholarly or more temperate. That's important. Not sure what Charles Murray gains by hitching his wagon to Milo's star at this point, but there you go. But the list itself isn't the important part of the story. Here's the important part. According to campus spokesperson Dan Mogulof, however, the campus administration is currently unable to confirm a list of speakers. Only 3 of the speakers have contacted the campus or UCPD to make security arrangements, which is required for all campus events. Additionally, rental fees for available indoor venues have not been paid, and no venue contracts have been signed. To date, a number of key deadlines have been missed, Mogulof said in an email. While campus officials and venue managers are working diligently to assist the Berkeley Patriot Group with its proposed events, they've borrowed the name Patriot, the group's failure to meet important deadlines is making it increasingly difficult to ensure a safe and secure program. In other words, we're 9 days away from a huge 4-day conference and no venue contracts have been signed. No security arrangements are in place. No rental payments have been made. Only 3 speakers have been confirmed directly with UCB administrators. Remember, last night, that would have been Thursday night, a single speaker, a speaker less controversial than most of the names on this list, shut down half the campus. Oh, and look at this. Late last night, UCB announced that one of the speakers on the list never agreed to appear. This is a tweet by Berkeley side. Cal Representative Dan Mogulof says speaker on Milo's Free Speech Week list called UC Berkeley confused, saying they never agreed to participate. To summarize, planning for this supposed Free Speech Week doesn't seem to be in line with the claims that are being made about it at all. So what does all this mean? Well, there's a few possibilities. Remember first that Milo has pulled a Berkeley bait and switch before. He claimed he was planning an appearance at Berkeley in May, put up posters and everything, and then quote unquote canceled at the last minute. So one possibility is that Milo is just pulling a PR prank, and then he'll cancel the event at a press conference next week. That'd be this week. As likely, though, to my mind, is the chance that the hoax is a more sinister one, and that the plan is to blame UC Berkeley for the cancellation, or the quote-unquote cancellation. And that seems to be what may be in the offing here, is he is going to say, because these snowflakes couldn't stand it and couldn't control all of the weirdos and hippies and idiots on the campus, we were forced to cancel, or even that they forced us out and refused to give us the permits. And that may be the upshot of all of this too. Well, they refused to give us the permits. They wouldn't allow us on their campus. Well, you didn't sign any rental agreements or even tell us who was coming or pay any of the deposits. You didn't follow the rules, Mr. Law and Order. That's why you didn't get but it will be reported nonetheless. He'll have a press conference and say they wouldn't give me the venue. Here's the Daily Cal's story on this one. Failure to confirm. This one was actually a Saturday follow-up to this. Berkeley Patriot, that's the right-wing group, loses Zellerbach Wheeler auditoriums for Free Speech Week, the 2 indoor venues that they plan to use. Chantel Lee, the lead writer here, Campus conservative student publication The Berkeley Patriot has failed to provide sufficient payments for the use of Zellerbach and Wheeler halls to host Free Speech Week at UC Berkeley. The Berkeley Patriot missed 3 separate deadlines to confirm the 2 venues, according to campus spokesperson Dan Mogiloff. Mogiloff said in an email that the campus gave the Berkeley Patriot the original contracts to use Wheeler and Zellerbach halls August 11th, with a deadline of signing them and paying fees by August 18th. The Berkeley Patriot missed that deadline. The campus extended the publication's deadline to August 25th, also missed that. On Wednesday, last week, at 2:30 p.m., the campus informed the Berkeley Patriot its final deadline to sign the venue contracts was Friday, 5 p.m. Although the organization was able to sign the contracts in time, it was unable to secure the necessary payments. Money, it seems, makes the world go round. The Berkeley Patriot News editor, Pranav Jandhayala, screwed up his name, or her name, I didn't even know, alleged that the publication was given less than a couple hours to pull the paperwork together. Sounds like they had considerably more than that. We've done everything that they've asked. We've done it as quickly as we humanly possibly could. That's exactly what it says. It's a big logistical nightmare. What's the nightmare? Get money, pay, deposit. Mike Wright, the president of the Berkeley Patriot, could not be reached for comment as of press time. The lineup for speakers, first announced by Milo's press team. After the release of the lineup, several of the scheduled speakers said they had no plans to come to UC Berkeley for the 4-day-long event. The university cannot defend spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to provide security arrangements for events based on a press release and inconsistent schedules, Mogiloff said in his email. So it looks like the whole thing's falling apart, to probably no one's surprise. And, look out. Be on the lookout for a upcoming Milo Yiannopoulos press conference at which he blames snowflakes and political correctness run amok for having to cancel his event, which he apparently had no intention of holding in the first place. But he's back in the news, and his name's being printed all over the place, and his photo is running everywhere because he said he was gonna. Just like the mother of all rallies, which this past weekend, fell apart entirely in Washington, D.C. Why they decided to name it that and force themselves to live up to the name like mother of all rallies, I have no idea, except they're very stupid people. They were outnumbered by the Juggalo March, which I still can't understand why that even happened, but fans of the Insane Clown Posse that's what they call themselves, Juggalos. It's all very weird and funny, and apparently somehow they got themselves officially designated as a gang or something. I never even bothered to look into that, but they had more people protesting that than showed up at the mother of all rallies, and they cordoned off this huge area. I think they ended up having about 150 attendees, gawkers, onlookers, counter-protesters, reporters, etc. on hand. Hardly anybody showed up for this thing. Guess what? I guess community organizing isn't really all that easy a thing to do after all. After all that sneering at Barack Obama and his background. All right. Just thought I'd get that in there. There's more to report on the rest of the week. But for now, batting cleanup, it's the after show with stories like this coming up next. The wage gap between black and white workers is wider today than it was after the civil rights movement. A federal judge says businesses can discriminate as long as they write about it on Facebook. That'll be good. I think there'll be plenty of writing about their discrimination on Facebook. And an Alabama chiropractor admits to fat shaming his employees. We got it all down there in Alabama Chiropractic. For the last half, we report that GOP Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana is obsessed with repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, but the people who voted for him are not. And a handful of ultra-rich dynastic families bleeding the country dry while destroying American democracy is a feature.
From Daily Kos Radio.
Not a bug.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Thanks very much for listening today. Do stay tuned, as you should all day long, to Netroots Radio. Those of you listening elsewhere, you can find them at netrootsradio.com if you want to listen into all that great stuff I just teased for you. That's the point of it. Why not make it worth my while? Yes, and make it worth your own while, too. Listen in, and I'll see you tomorrow.